Welcome to another deep dive. We're going to be taking a close look at some excerpts you sent in from Dopamine Nation by Dr. Anna Lembke.
A really fascinating exploration of how pleasure and pain are so closely linked.
Especially in the context of modern life.
And it's incredible how these can get out of whack, leading to some pretty serious consequences, like
Addiction.
definitely addiction, but even anxiety, depression, and physical discomfort.
It's really fascinating how Dr. Lemke combines all this scientific research with real-life stories, making these complex topics so much more accessible.
Absolutely, it brings a human element to the science that is often overlooked and helps make it.
Relatable, for sure.
One of the things that really struck me was the way she explains how our brains actually process both pleasure and pain in the same region.
It's like...
It's like two sides of the same coin, almost.
Right, and it really blew my mind when she described how when we experience those really intense, pleasurable moments, our brain...
It tries to compensate, doesn't it?
It does. It immediately tries to tilt towards pain to balance things out.
Which is why we're always left wanting more, craving that next hit, whether it's another piece of chocolate.
Or wishing that amazing book would just never end.
Exactly. It's like a seesaw.
That's such a great analogy. The more we push down on the pleasure side,
The harder that pain pushes back to try and regain equilibrium.
it makes sense, but it's also kind of counterintuitive.
It is, and it's this dynamic that Dr. Lemke argues becomes even more pronounced in our modern world in what she calls the dopamine economy.
We're just surrounded by sources of instant gratification, right? From those sugary treats and addictive apps to the never-ending scroll of social media.
Endless content vying for our attention.
Everything is designed to deliver those quick hits of pleasure.
Oh, absolutely. And it's like our whole environment is constantly pushing us towards that pleasure side of the seesaw.
So then what happens?
Well, as you can imagine, our brains become desensitized. We need more and more stimulation just to achieve the same level of satisfaction.
It's a recipe for disaster, isn't
Yeah.
it?
In a way, Dr. Lemke even draws a connection between this dopamine overload and the increasing rates of what are being called deaths of despair.
Those are pretty powerful words.
They are, particularly impacting middle-aged Americans.
It makes you stop and think, what can we do to break free from this cycle?
Thankfully, Dr. Lembke doesn't just leave us hanging with this grim outlook. She offers some practical solutions, like the concept of dopamine fasting.
I've heard of this.
It's not about complete deprivation, it's more about being strategic. Taking a break from those specific activities or substances that are hijacking our reward system.
So giving our brains a chance to sort of hit the reset button.
Exactly, to recalibrate and regain some equilibrium.
And she even has this helpful acronym,
Yeah,
right?
dopamine.
To walk us through the process.
It stands for defining your objectives, recognizing the problems associated with your consumption, and cultivating mindfulness in your approach.
That's pretty practical advice.
And this leads nicely into the idea of self-binding.
Another fascinating concept.
It's all about setting boundaries, consciously limiting our access to those tempting rewards, those things that constantly tug at us.
Like Odysseus tying himself to the mast so he wouldn't be lured in by the siren song, as Dr. Lemke puts it.
Such a vivid image, right?
It is. And it can take a variety of forms, can't it?
Absolutely. From practical things like removing tempting snacks from your pantry to utilizing technology blockers on your devices.
It's all about acknowledging our weaknesses and being proactive.
Exactly. Setting ourselves up for success by creating a more supportive environment.
That makes a lot of sense. But this is where things get really interesting. Dr. Lemke dives into this unexpected power of pain.
Introducing the concept of hormesis.
And this is like the idea that small, controlled doses of pain or stress
Can actually be beneficial in the long run.
it's mind-blowing, right?
It is. So things like cold showers, intense exercise, or intermittent fasting
Pushing on that pain side of the balance.
can actually increase our resilience and even enhance our ability to experience pleasure.
So we're not talking about avoiding pain altogether. It's more about strategic incorporation.
Right. And there's a growing body of scientific evidence to support this approach.
Dr. Lemke mentioned some pretty compelling studies showing how cold water immersion can dramatically boost those feel-good chemicals in our brain,
Like dopamine and norepinephrine.
leading to a natural high.
Even ancient philosophers, think Socrates,
Yeah.
pondered this curious connection between pain and pleasure, seeing them as two sides of the same coin.
Which reminds me of those experiments she describes where dogs were exposed to small, controlled electrical shocks.
And what happened?
What's crazy is that over time, they actually started exhibiting what researchers termed a fit of joy after each shock ended.
It highlights the remarkable adaptability of the brain, constantly seeking equilibrium.
So fascinating. And it directly connects to Dr. Lemke's emphasis on radical honesty, both with ourselves and with others.
This is a powerful idea. Tell me more about what you took away from this.
Well, she's advocating for complete truthfulness, even when it's difficult or uncomfortable.
Hmm, a pretty tall order in today's world.
It is, but she argues that this embracing of vulnerability and the sharing of our struggles, it can actually foster deeper connections and help combat that isolation that often fuels addiction.
I can see how that would make a difference.
And it's inspiring that she's so open about her own challenges.
She shares personal stories.
She does, about how opening up about her own struggles has led to stronger relationships and better outcomes in her life.
So it's about creating an environment where we can be vulnerable without judgment.
Yes,
Yeah.
recognizing that we're all in this together.
Each facing our own unique set of challenges.
Exactly. And Dr. Lemke draws a distinction between this type of honesty and what she calls destructive shame.
What's the difference?
Destructive shame isolates us and perpetuates those negative behaviors, while this idea of pro-social shame,
Okay.
like what you see in support groups like Alcoholics Anonymous,
Mm-hmm.
it actually utilizes vulnerability as a source of strength and accountability within a supportive community.
That's a fascinating contrast, and it makes me think about her concept of the plenty mindset.
It's all connected, isn't it?
It seems to be.
This idea that honesty and genuine connection can create a sense of abundance, even when we're surrounded by messages that trigger a scarcity mindset.
Powerful stuff. We've certainly delved into some deep waters today.
We have. Dr. Lemke's work is full of these thought-provoking insights that challenge us to really rethink our relationship with pleasure and pain,
To be more aware of our dopamine intake.
and to consider those unexpected benefits of embracing discomfort, at least in a controlled way.
And let's not forget the power of radical honesty.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that vulnerability, when shared authentically, can be a catalyst for deeper connection and even healing.
Dr. Lemke leaves us with a really intriguing question to ponder.
What's that?
How can we practice this radical honesty in a way that is both authentic and constructive?
While also avoiding what she calls disclosure porn, where vulnerability is used to manipulate rather than genuinely connect.
That's a great question. Definitely worth some serious contemplation.
Mm-hmm.
Picking up on this idea of how our brains respond to pleasure, Dr. Lembke uses this really great analogy of a balance scale.
To illustrate the interplay between pleasure and pain.
Exactly. So you can imagine when that scale tips too far towards pleasure.
What happens then?
Well, our brains, being the incredible machines they are, they actually start to compensate by increasing our tolerance.
So we need more and more.
Exactly. More of that stimulus to achieve the same level of satisfaction.
And this is what's known as...
Neuroadaptation.
Right, and it's a major driving force behind addiction.
We get caught in this cycle, constantly chasing that elusive feeling of contentment.
Always seeking out those more intense experiences or substances.
It's like we're on this hedonic treadmill,
Running and running.
but never quite reaching the finish line.
And that's where Dr. Lemke's insights into this modern dopamine economy become so relevant.
We're just bombarded with these readily accessible, highly rewarding stimuli.
Temptations everywhere we turn.
Sugary treats, addictive apps, that constant stream of content on social media.
It can feel overwhelming at times.
It can, and it's this overstimulation that Dr. Lemke links to.
Not just addiction.
Right, but also anxiety, depression, and even physical ailments.
It's a reminder that too much of a good thing.
Can actually be detrimental to our well-being.
But amidst all of this, Dr. Lemke offers a glimmer of hope with this idea of
Dopamine fasting.
giving our brains a chance to reset, right?
To recalibrate and restore equilibrium.
It's not about total deprivation.
No, it's more about being intentional, taking a break from those specific activities or substances that have basically hijacked our reward system.
And she even provides this handy acronym.
She does, dopamine.
I love a good acronym. What does it stand for?
So it's defining your objectives, identifying the problems associated with your consumption, and then cultivating mindfulness in your approach.
Okay, I could see how that would be helpful in guiding the process.
And it leads nicely into this concept of self-binding.
Which we touched on briefly earlier.
It's all about taking those proactive steps, consciously limiting our access to those tempting rewards.
Acknowledging that willpower alone.
May not be enough.
So it's like setting those boundaries for ourselves.
Exactly, and creating a more supportive environment.
She uses that analogy of Odysseus tying himself to the mast.
To resist the allure of the sirens.
It paints such a vivid picture, doesn't it?
It does, and it can take so many different forms.
What are some examples?
Well, it could be something as simple as removing those tempting snacks from your home
Out of sight, out of mind.
or utilizing those technology blockers on your devices
It's about understanding our own vulnerabilities.
and taking those deliberate steps to mitigate those risks.
That makes sense. Setting ourselves up for success by removing as many of those temptations as possible.
Dr. Lembke shares some really interesting case studies in her book to illustrate these concepts.
Any that particularly stand out to you?
Well, the story of Jacob, who struggled with compulsive pornography use, really resonated with me.
That's a challenge a lot of people face today.
It is, and his story really highlights how addiction can sneak up on us,
Starting with seemingly harmless behaviors.
but gradually spiraling out of control.
In Jacob's case, it led to isolation, shame, even the breakdown of his marriage.
It's a cautionary tale about how easily we can slip into those compulsive patterns.
But his story also offers hope, right?
It does, because through therapy and a commitment to radical honesty
He was able to confront his addiction.
and start rebuilding his life.
It shows the power of self-awareness, accountability, and those genuine connections with others.
And this is where those self-binding techniques come into play.
So how did Jacob use self-binding?
Well, it wasn't just about abstaining from pornography.
He had to go further.
He did. He had to actively avoid anything that could potentially trigger a relapse.
Like what?
Certain TV shows, even seemingly harmless images.
Wow, so it was about being really vigilant and proactive?
Yeah. Exactly. Understanding his own vulnerabilities and taking those deliberate steps to protect himself.
Dr. Lembke provides other compelling examples of self-binding.
She does, like the patient who struggled with alcohol consumption.
What did he do?
He made the decision to remove all alcohol from his home,
Such a simple change.
but incredibly powerful.
That removes the temptation entirely.
She even talks about the rise of gluten-free diets as a form of categorical self-binding,
Interesting. So people are restricting entire categories of food.
as a way to curb their consumption.
It's fascinating how these concepts can show up in so many different areas of our life.
It is, and Dr. Lembke delves into another interesting concept related to this: delay discounting.
Now that's a new one for me. What is delayed discounting?
It's basically our tendency to prioritize immediate rewards,
Over those that are further off in the future.
even if those future rewards might be larger or more beneficial in the long run,
So it's like choosing a smaller piece of cake now.
rather than waiting for a bigger, more delicious slice later.
It's human nature, isn't it?
It is, but Dr. Lembke points out that those who struggle with addiction,
They tend to exhibit an even stronger preference for those immediate rewards.
they do, even if they're objectively smaller than those future rewards.
So addiction can actually warp our perception of time and value.
Prioritizing immediate gratification over long-term well-being.
That's a bit unsettling.
It is, and this is where Dr. Lembke emphasizes the importance of honesty.
How so?
She argues that being honest, both with ourselves and with others, can help us overcome that allure of those immediate rewards.
And make choices that are more aligned with our long-term goals.
It's about cultivating self-awareness
Recognizing our weaknesses.
and seeking support when we need it,
And she also talks about the potential benefits of prosocial shame.
which is a very different thing from destructive shame.
Right, we talked about that earlier.
So prosocial shame is about using vulnerability in a constructive way
Within a supportive community.
to foster accountability and personal growth,
It's like what you see in those 12-step programs.
like Alcoholics Anonymous,
It creates that safe space.
where individuals can share their struggles
Receive encouragement without judgment.
and work towards recovery together.
It's really powerful, using collective vulnerability as a force for healing.
It is, and it highlights the impact of our environment and the people we surround ourselves with.
Absolutely. It seems like Dr. Lembke is advocating for a more compassionate and understanding approach to addiction,
She is, recognizing that it's not a moral failing.
but rather this complex interplay of biological, psychological, and social factors,
And she challenges us to examine our own beliefs and biases.
to adopt a more empathetic and supportive stance,
This all ties back to her concept of cultivating a plenty mindset.
where honesty and genuine connection,
Create that sense of abundance.
even in a world that often promotes a scarcity mindset
It's a reminder that true fulfillment doesn't come from external validation,
or material possessions,
but from those deep, meaningful connections.
with ourselves and with others,
And from embracing our shared humanity.
with all of its complexities and imperfections.
We've certainly covered a lot of ground today.
We have. Dr. Lembke's work is both challenging and inspiring.
It encourages us to examine our relationship with pleasure and pain.
To be mindful of our dopamine intake.
And to recognize the transformative power of honesty and connection.
And we've only just scratched the surface.
There's still so much more to explore in Dr. Lemke's Dopamine Nation.
This whole idea of honesty, Dr. Lembke takes it even further, connecting it to how we tell our own life stories.
It's fascinating, isn't it? She suggests the way we narrate our past experiences can actually shape our future behavior.
So how we frame those experiences
Exactly.
can influence the choices we make moving forward.
She talks about crafting what she calls healing stories,
Okay.
where we acknowledge our own agency, our responsibility for the choices we've made,
As opposed to
as opposed to falling into that trap of a victim narrative.
where we're always blaming external factors for our misfortunes.
It's about taking ownership, even when things haven't gone our way,
Embracing those moments where we maybe didn't make the best decisions.
and learning from them
So incorporating honesty into our personal narratives, even the messy parts,
allows us to gain those genuine insights.
leading to a deeper understanding of ourselves.
And ultimately empowering us to make more conscious, informed choices moving forward.
It's about moving beyond blame and stepping into that space of accountability,
Even when it's uncomfortable.
which can be tough.
It can, but Dr. Lembke even shares a personal story about how she used the 12 steps.
The process often associated with addiction recovery.
Right, to address some lingering resentments she had towards her mother.
Wow. So she applied those principles to her own life.
She did, and it speaks volumes about her commitment to practicing what she preaches.
It's inspiring to see that vulnerability
Through that process, she gained a much deeper understanding of herself.
and a greater appreciation for the power of honestly confronting our own shortcomings.
We're all a work in progress, right?
Always learning, always evolving.
And this brings us back to another one of Dr. Lemke's key concepts, pro-social shame.
We touched on this briefly in the previous parts.
But it's worth exploring further.
So remind me, how does pro-social shame differ from that destructive shame?
Well, destructive shame isolates us, right? It feeds those negative behavior.
Pushes us further into that cycle.
But pro-social shame, it's all about leveraging vulnerability as a source of strength.
Within a supportive community,
Exactly. It's like what you see in Alcoholics Anonymous.
where people feel safe enough to share their struggles openly.
And receive encouragement without judgment.
It's the power of collective vulnerability.
Creating that space for healing and growth.
That's beautiful. And she introduces this other concept, club goods.
Have you heard of this?
I'm not familiar with that term.
So club goods are basically those rewards that come from being part of a group.
The sense of belonging, shared purpose.
The camaraderie, the mutual support.
For social creatures, we need that connection.
We do, and Dr. Lembke argues that honesty is crucial for maintaining the integrity of those club goods.
Otherwise,
You get what she calls free riders.
those who benefit from the group,
Without actually contributing.
taking advantage of the shared resources without upholding their end of the bargain,
And that can really undermine the collective trust and support.
eroding the very foundation of the group.
She shares a story about Joan, a woman who found recovery through Alcoholics Anonymous.
So she initially benefited from those club goods.
She did, but she eventually relapsed.
And what happened?
Well, she chose to hide her relapse from the group.
So she was essentially a free rider,
Sadly, and it created this sense of distrust.
and ultimately diminished those very club goods that had been so vital to her initial recovery.
It's a reminder that honesty isn't just a personal virtue.
It's essential for building and maintaining those strong, supportive communities.
Dr. Lemke's work really encourages us to re-examine our relationship with honesty.
It's not just about being truthful for our own sake.
It impacts those around us.
It's about recognizing that our individual actions have ripple effects within our communities.
It's a call to embrace vulnerability, share our stories authentically, and cultivate a culture of support and accountability,
This vision of a world where honesty is the foundation for deeper connection.
creating a more compassionate and understanding society.
What a powerful message. As we wrap up this deep dive into Dr. Lembke's Dopamine Nation, I'm struck by how she seamlessly weaves together science, personal experience, and philosophical insights.
It's a rich tapestry of knowledge.
It truly is, and it's given us so much to reflect on.
It's not about finding those easy answers or quick fixes.
It's about embracing that ongoing journey of exploration and growth.
Absolutely. Dr. Lemke's work provides valuable guidance for navigating the complexities of pleasure, pain, and addiction in our modern world.
But it also offers a roadmap for cultivating honesty, resilience, and meaningful connection in all aspects of our lives.
A message of hope, reminding us that even amidst those inevitable struggles,
We have the capacity to heal, to grow, to create a world where honesty flourishes.
Before we sign off, let's revisit those 10 key takeaways that emerged from our deep dive.
I think a recap would be helpful.
So first, we explored how our brains actually process both pleasure and pain in the same region.
And how intense pleasure triggers a counterbalancing pain response, leading to those cravings.
Then we delved into the challenges of our modern dopamine economy.
And how it can make us more vulnerable to addiction and other issues.
We discussed practical strategies like dopamine fasting and self-binding.
As ways to regain control and reset that delicate pleasure-pain balance.
And we explored the surprising benefits of embracing small doses of pain or stress, what Dr. Lembke calls hormesis.
Okay, that's 5. What about the other 5?
We talked about how activities like cold showers, intense exercise, and intermittent fasting can be great examples of hormetic practices.
Right, and then we moved into the realm of radical honesty.
Emphasizing its importance in combating addiction and fostering genuine connection.
And the power of telling truthful stories about our lives.
To promote self-awareness, accountability, and healing.
We also explored the concept of prosocial shame.
And how it can be leveraged to build connection and support recovery, especially in communities like Alcoholics Anonymous.
And finally, we touched on the importance of cultivating a plenty mindset through honesty and connection.
To help us thrive, even in a world that often triggers that scarcity mindset.
These 10 takeaways offer incredible insights for navigating the complexities of modern life and cultivating a more balanced and fulfilling existence.
It's been an incredible journey.
It has. And remember, the pursuit of knowledge doesn't end here.
Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into this fascinating world around us.
Until next time, happy pondering.